Morning, church. I want to remind you as we reach our halfway point of this week to keep the focus on Jesus. And even in your discouragement or your fears, He is there and He forever will be. And don't take my word for it. You can find the promises that He gives in the Bible, and I want you and encourage you to hold on to those. With that, let's begin. Starting from a really young age, you were probably asked questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or who do you want to be like when you get older? You see, we all have these dreams and these thoughts of what we might be when we get older. But then as you get older, those dreams and those thoughts of what you might become, you really have to start thinking about it. And an advice that is frequently given by many different academic counselors, professionals, adults, and maybe your parents is the need and the importance to plan for your future, right? People tell you, okay, if you want to be a doctor, then this is what you got to do. Study hard on all your science classes. Take AP classes. Don't forget to volunteer at the hospital. Get working experience. Go get tutoring so that you could be top of your class. Study for your SATs. When you get to college, you take these classes, but don't take a class if it's this professor, and go here, do this, don't do that, but do these. Now, regardless of whatever your dream or goal may look like, it's important that we plan it out, step by step, year by year. We plan with the intent to succeed. Now, when I was in high school, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, and you might remember this story I've shared. But I wasn't doing well in math, pre-calc to be exact. And because I was doing so bad, I had a tutor. But the tutor was a dentist that went to my church. And from there, long story short, I ended up having a part-time internship / job that started towards the end of my senior year in high school. And eventually, that turned into my dream. And I wanted to be a dentist. From there, I started to plan. Okay, I want to be a dentist. That means I need to study bio. I need to be a bio major. Let me study all the science. I got to study hard so that I can get to dental school one day. I met with all my academic advisors and talked to the dentist and many other people, and a plan was made from year 1 to year 4 of college. But things didn't go according to that plan, and I performed poorly, right? I lost my scholarships, grant money, I was put on academic probation. I was absolutely anything but the model student. And after dabbing around with 3 different majors, being undeclared, taking random classes, working at UPS, going on a mission trip, after 6 years, I realized that my purpose and calling in life was to go into ministry. So in total, 8 years after I finished high school, I finally graduated with my degree in religion, and now here I am as a pastor. But the secret was not necessarily planning in the way in which we might think of traditional planning. Today, we're looking at James chapter 4, and the emphasis of this chapter is really the idea of humility, about being humble. But this morning, the how-to that we're going to look at is how to plan for the future. But you might be wondering, okay, Pastor, I don't see that connection, right? Everything you just talked about and then being humble, like what's the connection? But if you look at chapter 4, you do see that he's talking about humility, right? Verse 10 specifically says to humble yourself before the Lord and He will exalt you. But if you look carefully at the other how-tos in this chapter, there's 3 others. James is indirectly talking about humility in the way in which our lives as Christians pan out. We have to be humble. So yes, he directly talks about humility, but the other how-tos in this chapter point to the idea of what it means to be humble and then what that looks like. And I want to show you with this particular how-to, the how to plan for your future actually plays an important role on learning to walk humbly with our God. Let's read together. James chapter 4, verse 13 to 17. It says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." James gives us a super practical advice on how to plan for the future. And I'll tell you what it is now. But basically, our planning for the future needs to be in alignment with God's will. But before he even gets to that, he wants us to consider 3 specific sins which could prevent us from planning our future according to God's will. Verse 13 to 15, he talks about this first sin, the sin of presumption, to assume something, right? You see, when you are presumptuous and assuming things, it's actually an arrogant display of our pride. And the way James describes this is he uses the analogy of a merchant who has plans to go to another city to spend time there and make some money. You see, the merchant assumes that his plans are his and God has no say in all of that. But James makes it so clear. You don't know what tomorrow brings, because the reality is often we forget that we are just finite beings, right? We're so limited as humans. We don't know the future. No one does. Only God does. So it's presumptuous to think that we can live and plan without God. When we do this, we're basically denying who we are, who God is, and how much we actually really need God every day of our lives. Then the second sin, verse 16, is the sin of boasting. Now, the Greek word for boasting as used here has the roots in the ideal of a person that goes around claiming to have the cure to something, but they're actually not cures, right? It's the ideal of boasting about things which he actually can't do. It's being fake, basically. So you see, the sin of boasting is based on the invalid assumption that we can control our own destiny. We can control our own lives. But then again, it's not true. We can't. And then finally, the third sin James mentioned is the sin of omission, or in other words, failing to do what is right when we know what is right. And that's a huge theme for James, right? Because James talks about how we should become doers, not just sayers of the word. But after he identifies all 3 of these different sins, he gives us the very easy, practical formula we can use to make future plans. Verse 15, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. Instead of presuming things or boasting or failing to do what is right, we should commit ourselves to God and his will. In other words, our planning is based on the conviction that our lives and our future is not in our hands, but in God's hands. So how do we do that? It's through prayer. Pray daily, pray always, read the word, be a part of a church community. And it's through these very things that you will begin to see and understand God's will and God's plan for your life. So church, remember this. If you're planning for the future, live with dependence on God's plan and trust in his future for you.